right, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody had a nice break. Ready to hit the ground running here, as the professor was saying, as we get to this last stretch. In 2013, the NFL and its players union settled on a $700 million lawsuit. Now, as an avid football fan, and when I say avid, sometimes annoying and obnoxious, but avid football fan, I was puzzled. The whole issue for this lawsuit was based around concussions. You see, these former players were having issues later on in their life, just living life. Their mental health and physical health was deteriorating. And as I mentioned before about me being the avid football fan, I had seen many people kind of get concussions and go right back into the game as if nothing was wrong. So I was extremely interested and wanted to do more research on what this seemingly small thing of a concussion, how it generated a $700 settlement, $700 million settlement, pardon me. So my speech today will inform you guys on what a concussion is, the biggest danger of a concussion, which is CTE, and then how to prevent some of the long-lasting effects of a concussion and concussions in general. First off, according to the survey I did, 75% of you guys did not know what a concussion was. So I kind of wanted to start out with the definition of concussion, just so everyone was familiar with it before we went forward. According to an article in the Journal of Clinical Neuroscience written by Vinny G. Karani and Andrew K., a concussion is defined as a sudden onset alteration of consciousness due to a combination of functional and structural disturbances following an impact to the brain. So to kind of put that in a little bit of layman's terms, any kind of head trauma that kind of impairs, let's just say, your vision, your sensitivity to light, your memory, that's kind of what we're going for in terms of a concussion. It's important to note because, as I mentioned, a lot of athletes are headlined as having concussions and then having issues with them as well. Anybody can get them. I could literally be walking right now, slip, fall, hit my head, and I can get one. So, and they're very common and very dangerous for everybody, not just athletes. As I previously mentioned, some of the side effects of a concussion can be dizziness, headaches, and memory loss. Unfortunately, I actually got to witness this firsthand. My brother Nicholas plays football for Wildwood High School. So I remember in one of his games, we drove down to see him. We're cheering him on, yeah, Nick. And all of a sudden, he gets laid out. We're talking wiped out, hit to the head. And like I had mentioned, me watching all those football tapes, I immediately feared he had a concussion. It was very scary for my family and I because when we saw Nick get up, right away he stumbled. He was dizzy. And he could not keep his eyes open. His light sensitivity it was scary. He couldn't, be in a room with any kind of light, extremely dizzy. So luckily Nick made a full recovery, but just the immediate impact, it was very scary seeing what a concussion could do to somebody. Now that you know a little bit more about what a concussion is, I'm going to let you know about the greatest danger of a concussion, which is CTE. The greatest consequence to a concussion isn't the short-term headache you might get or the dizziness or, laying in bed for maybe a week to kind of reset yourself and get better. It's the long-term effects. According to the Weekly Journal of International Science in an article on February 2015, author Helen Sheen informs us about CTE. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy is a degenerative brain disease caused by multiple head injuries, most popularly concussions. CTE side effects are extremely scary. They can they can lead to mood swings, extreme anger, memory loss. A lot of things that, especially as you see people down the line who've had them, can be very scary. The side effects of CTE were illustrated terribly by the tragic events of Junior Seau. Anybody familiar with Junior Seau at all by any chance? All right, so I see not many of you. Junior Seau, to kind of go into who he was a football player who was an outstanding teammate, father, great guy, played many years in the NFL, had many concussions. Unfortunately, Seau ended up taking his own life, shooting himself in the chest a couple years after retiring. According to an article by Thomas Drysdale in the Journal of Legal Medicine, Seau's autopsy revealed massive amounts of CTE in his brain. I just want everybody to note, and it is commonly believed, that Seau shot himself in the chest to save his brain for science. So it's a little scary because he knew something was wrong. He knew he wasn't right in the head. And the massive amounts of CTE that were found in his autopsy kind of explain what a lot of family members saw as a change in him, change in his demeanor, just how he was acting. Now that we've examined the dire effects of CTE, here are a few ways to prevent concussions and the long-term effects of CTE. It's important to note that, like I previously stated, concussions can happen to anyone. You know, we don't have to be football players to feel their traumatic effects. According to Wiley Journals in May 2016, in an article by Susan Davies, the most effective way to prevent concussions and their effects is to be educated about them. And by being educated, one of the more common examples I'll use is even being a parent, in the last stage you have a little one, or a coach or anything like that, just being aware of what the side effects are. What, you know, if you're a parent or a coach and you see a player like I told you about my brother who got hit, stumbling around, has a massive headache, took a hard hit. This is all stuff that if you can catch early on, yes, they may have sustained a concussion, but the long-term effects of it won't be as damaging. Unfortunately for a lot of the NFL players that I've mentioned in that lawsuit, the research on concussions wasn't as far developed, and a lot of them, after sustaining one, would go right back into the game, be at risk again for more head trauma, and do a lot of damage to themselves that can't be undone. For those of us, another great example of what the education of concussions has done is the NFL rules. As the National Football League has learned more and more about what concussions can do to you, they've set up more rules that have made the game safer for the players. Some of these rules include penalization of players who might lead with their head and risk their neck. The most common ones I can think of are increased penalties during the game, ejections for players who make illegal hits in helmet-to-helmet contact, and then hefty fines kind of hitting the players in their pocket. They also have what's called concussion protocol, which is anybody who may appear to have suffered a concussion being removed from the game immediately and then not being allowed to return until after they're evaluated for a concussion. So the NFL has really stepped it up for their players' safety in terms of safeguarding them and trying to make the game safer for them in their head injuries. For those of us who aren't playing professional football and safeguarded by these rules, here's a neat little insight into what I've researched that might actually help you if you were to, or not prevent yourself from sustaining a concussion. According to a fall issue of American Fitness in an article by Matt Brasecki, strengthening neck muscles can help reduce the chance of a concussion occurring. I thought this was fascinating because usually we associate a lot more with your head with a concussion. But a strengthened and more stable neck helps by reducing the impulsive force to the head, which can prevent trauma. Kind of, in other words, a great example I could think of is, you know, I grew up with 3 brothers, so maybe my brothers and I are wrestling around. Professor, I know you have multiple sons, so I know this is probably common. If I were to, you know, my brother were to tackle me like he so often does, a more stable neck might prevent me from jolting back and hitting my head on something, just keeping that head area more safe and more stiff and kind of prevent the force from moving it around. All right, so I expect everybody to go to the gym and work on your neck muscles if you're worried about concussions in the future.
Wow.
All right. In conclusion, I think it's safe to say now that concussions are more than just heavy, hard hits that result in headaches. They can have extremely deadly long-term side effects. I hope that today's informative speech about what concussions are, their greatest threat to us being CTE and the long-term effects of it, and some ways to prevent concussions and CTE, have helped kind of shed a little bit more light on these concussions. As I said before, the huge lawsuit was kind of the first wave in creating more awareness about concussions. So hopefully as we go on further and further, concussion awareness becomes more and more clear. Thank you.